You're listening to the Sound Words STL podcast.
Hi, I'm John Fleming for SoundwordsSTL.com. Alternative rockers Toad the Wet Sprocket became household names when their singles All I Want and Walk on the Ocean charted in the top 20 of the Billboard Hot 100 during 1992. And more than a quarter century later, the band is still creating. The Santa Barbara, California band's latest single, Old Habits Die Hard, is available now. Frontman Glen Phillips has been busy on his own as well, touting 9 solo releases to go with the 6 LPs he's released with Toad. And recently, he's focused his efforts on raising money for charities across the country with his Facebook live streams and Stage It performances. Glen, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And first question I wanted to ask was about one of the newer Toad songs, Old Habits Die Hard. Now, it's a very political song. Is there any pressure to write something like that, not to alienate a portion of your audience, but still be able to speak your mind?
Oh, I successfully alienated a portion of the audience, but I also think it's a nuanced song, and I had a few people write me back and say they heard it, immediately got enraged, turned it off, and then went back and read the lyrics in order to fuel their anger and realized it was more nuanced than they might have thought. I mean, the conversation. I think any political conversation or any conversation between left and right is an I mean, it's a constant thing, and it's kind of necessary to make any complex country run, right? If there's only one opinion, one ideology, one way of looking at things, it turns right or left into some kind of authoritarian dystopia. So. I like the idea of there being a lively, active, and hopefully respectful conversation going on between those kind of extremes. And it's also a song about just kind of reconciling our past. It's you can't really look at this country and talk about being an originalist and simply ignore the fact that the founding fathers owned slaves. And if you try to tell a pretty story to work around that uncomfortable fact, you're missing a large part of what we can learn, and just the fact that all our heroes, no matter who they are flawed and are human beings. And of course, if they have the ego that can drive them to make these big changes in the world, they also probably have an ego that can drive them to do things like cheat on their wives or own other human beings or treat people badly. So, the shock horror of discovering that your heroes are imperfect just strikes me as an unwillingness to kind of see a larger picture.
So it sounds like there was some hesitance at first from people who were listening, but that you were able to, in large part, get people to at least listen once they got past maybe some initial hesitation or maybe outright anger.
Probably not. I mean, I around that time, I mean, kind of through where, when, and the funny thing is that song was written originally 2 years into the Trump presidency. And I would say that the Trump presidency, kind of went beyond typical ideology, and we tipped over into challenging the fabric of reality and really, I think America asking itself if it actually wants to be a democracy, and a lot of people thinking it shouldn't, or rather that it should be more of the originalist democracy where landowning whites, males, had the vote, and other people probably shouldn't, right? And so, we're pretty split right now, and there's once again, I think Trump brought about this embrace of authoritarianism and anti-democratic sentiment that I do think is dangerous to well, of course it's dangerous to democracy, but there's certain ideological things I'm not gonna back down from. But I do have a lot of conservative friends and do actually deeply respect, conservative ideals. Although I'm a diehard liberal myself. But I think we've kind of moved far beyond what used to pass for conservatism, and that the Republican Party is definitely having its own reckoning right now. So, um, and there's a degree to where things just get normalized, and the tenor of the conversation is such that it's really hard to just um, I don't know. I mean, I've prided myself on being able to talk to my friends, like far libertarian, and then we just talk about, well, what should be in the public sector and what shouldn't. Like, should roads be public? Should fire or police be public? And then you can have a discussion about you know, what constitutes too much government control and what's appropriate. Uh, Now, I think we just go straight to yelling at each other. Um, so, and that song as well is also about me looking at my own privilege and my own uh the second verse is all about like hoping that I'm looking for the truth, but realizing I also have my own preconceived ideas, and I'm um probably doing my own version of cognitive dissonance, and I'm probably doing my own version of you know bias in my own perceptions. And it's something we have to recognize in ourselves and work against. And I think everybody's fine to see cognitive bias in other people, but reluctant to admit it in themselves. So anyway, I pissed off a bunch of people. I probably lost half of my live cast audience in the process. But and I'm sorry I'm talking so much. I'm in an NPR kind of mood. Been listening to podcasts all day.
Oh, well, you are on a podcast. You are here to talk, so we certainly appreciate your candor.
It's not like top 40 radio responses though.
You should be okay. Now, to transition a little bit
Okay.
though from a song that you wrote that was quite personal and quite based on your own ideas and thoughts into just your very literal solo career. You've released a number of solo albums, including most recently Swallowed by the New, and you've collaborated with artists like Nickel Creek, which deviates from what is generally regarded as your signature sound with Toad the Wet Sprocket. How do you balance your solo career and your side projects with any sort of feelings of obligations to the band itself?
Um, I mean, when the band first started playing again, we were still, I think, sorting our way through a lot of the reasons that we broke up in the first place. And in the last few years, I think we found a real peace. I think for me, I like a lot of creative diversity, and it's being able to choose these different voices and then ask what songs are appropriate to each different voice is stimulating to me. So I I don't see them as being at odds. I think there's so many ways to be creative and to make music. So I like having room. I don't know. I feel like everything complements everything else, and um, it also just allows me when I go back to Toad, I'm ready to be in a rock band again. And if I get to do something, with Sean Watkins or my more acoustic friends, I love how lean and close to the ground and surprise, just even with two people, how surprising it can be night to night. And I love that. So, um, yeah, I just feel like there's room for it all.
You wrote the lyrics to the first Toad album, Bread and Circus, when you were only 15 years old. What do you think about when you go back and listen to those songs? Does it feel a little bit weird, like you're talking to a teenager or listening to a teenager, or does it still feel like true to yourself?
It lets me know that I've always been maudlin. Uh, like, wow, that kid thought he was really deep.
You're not the first 15-year-old to think that. Don't worry.
But I mean, for me, those first couple albums, I understand that people like them because they're very raw and unadorned. Uh, which to me, they're also almost embarrassingly so. Like, they're a little too revealing. Um, but Yeah, it's strange to look at myself at that age and have that be a public record of what I've done. There's a big part of me that wishes I could have just gone through that period and had it not publicly documented, uh, just because it's awkward. But but I also feel like, I was at least I was trying to deal with some complicated stuff, which, however clumsily I executed it.
Yeah. You certainly had a bigger audience for your teenage angst than most people do, so
Yeah.
credit there, I suppose. Sort of moving through your discography a little bit, though, the band's third and fourth albums, Fear and Dulcinea, both went platinum, and then you went from being an independent artist to being a full-fledged rock star in a very short amount of time. What was that experience like, kind of going from being a more independent underground thing to being like a legitimate pop star?
Um, it's hard to know. I mean, I spent most of the period when Toad was doing really well in a state of like deep imposter syndrome. I just, I was kind of terrified of it and had trouble relating to it or even thinking I belong. I kept thinking people would realize they got it wrong and it would all fall apart. So I probably could have enjoyed it a lot more. Um, and I don't have anything to compare it to. It's not like, I mean, the weird thing about the band is in some ways it set me up poorly in life for later years because I didn't struggle a lot at the beginning. The band got together and we put out these records, and I was too young to notice for the first two records, and then I was 22, and it's like, we're in the top 40. That's weird. And I'd never done anything else. I like met my wife when I was 18, and we got married. I was a dad by the time I was 25, married by 23. So my life happened, the top part of it happened kind of fast and furious, and I kind of just thought I could stumble into things and half try and do really well. And then I had decades of recovery, realizing that mostly things don't work that way. So um, it was an amazing experience, but once again, I don't have a lot to compare it to. If that makes sense. Like I was a kid. I was 8. It was the first stuff I ever did. So um, in my life, it just seemed like somehow what happened for no particular reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess if you have no other point of reference, it's hard to really compare it to anything.
Hmm.
So, one of the sort of famous stories of Toad the Wet Sprocket is how the band got its name, which was that it was the name of a fictional band that was first referenced in a Monty Python sketch. The story is
Yeah.
that when Eric Idle first heard that you guys were using that name, he was so surprised that he said that he nearly drove off the freeway. What was your reaction whenever you first heard that story?
I thought that was awesome. Uh, I'm a huge Monty Python fan, and yeah, we just loved that. So yeah, knowing that he enjoyed that we actually picked that name made me really happy. I think my second favorite like celebrity shout out for that was Patton Oswalt talking about basically like pre-internet nerddom, and that we kind of grew up in an era where you could still get your ass kicked for being a nerd, and where it took more work, if that makes sense, like to
Yeah.
go find your nerd materials, and so he gave some speech just talking about how like kids today, they call themselves nerds, they don't get it. They don't get how it took work and risk to be as as outcast as we were. Mentioned Toad the Wet Sprocket, a rare comedy thing from not from one of the shows or movies, but from one of the LPs. So he knew the sketch, appreciated the obscurity of the reference, and gave us our nerd cred, which made me very happy.
Yeah, as a fan of Monty Python, I'm sure it had to be very strange for you to even just consider the idea that they knew who you were, or at least that Eric Idle knew who you were.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess somebody sent it to him, I mean, we were going to try to have a cool name, and we couldn't think of anything cool. We had a bunch of really terrible names, and so we figured we had our first gig that they asked for a name for, that wasn't just like playing somebody's party. And it was like, and Dean, the bass player, was like, "Go the Wet Sprocket." We thought it was hilarious. And we figured we gave ourselves 6 months to come up with something actually cool. And then it just never happened.
Well, it worked out for you, so it's hard to
Yeah.
complain too much about it.
There you go.
So,
and I mean, no matter what, once a year, there is an article in some magazine on the worst band names of all time. And we are guaranteed to be on every one of those lists, which is awesome.
well, it doesn't seem fair, but it's publicity, so
No, I mean,
chalk that up.
it was supposed. I mean, here's the thing: is like when Monty Python came, it wasn't like they were trying to come up with a good band name.
That's
It
true.
was supposed to be the worst band name of all time.
It's sort of the point. They kind of,
Yeah.
I guess, new audiences get to appreciate the humor of the sketch, just like you did, and it was all thanks
Yeah.
to you, and thanks to the band. To shift away, I guess, a little bit from the band, I guess, again, your most recent solo album was Swallowed by the New, which was released in 2016, re-released in 2018, and then 2 new Toad singles came out last year. When can we expect more new music from you individually and or from Toad?
Toad just finished. I think we got the last mix. We are waiting for a background vocal from a very special guest. And aside from that, the album is done. So it's going to be called Starting Now. It'll come out sometime later this year. 8 to 16 weeks from now or something like that. And then I am working. I got like 2 more songs to write for a solo album, and then I have kind of a side project that's a little more hippie.
Okay.
So there's a few things in the works right now, but yeah, I'm looking forward. It's great to have the Toad album done and be able to look at I'm part of a songwriting group led by Matt the Electrician. Do you know the Bob Schneider writing game? Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think I have, no.
So Bob Schneider, it used to be he would do it on tour, and I did this years ago with Nickel Creek, where every day we would have a title for a song, and everybody had to write a song by midnight every day with the same title. And then as time went by, I got off tour, and Matt the Electrician from Austin has this group, and they do the same thing. So it's every Friday he sends out a title, and there's about 15 of us, and we all write a song. And so I'm kind of taking my favorite songs from that songwriting group, and I figure I have a couple more weeks, and every song I write for that is another possibility for this album, and I'm just going to do kind of a compilation of songs that I wrote for Matt. So.
Sounds like you are certainly keeping busy. And so you've been in the music business now for 35 plus years. What advice would you give to a rock band that's trying to make it today? Certainly the industry's changed a lot, and in the last year, much less the last 35. What kind of advice would you give to anyone who's trying to find their way?
I mean, finding their way today. I mean, if most of the advice I could give would be like study physics and make a time machine and go back to the 90s, when that's the world I knew, right? Is well-funded record companies, and at a certain time where being on a label was an asset. And I think these days you need to do it yourself. You need to get your team. You need to create what you're creating. I think for signing bands, it used to be like, do we like their tape, and do we feel like we could market them and sell them and take this on the road? And now it's much more like, for signing an artist, it's, well, how many followers do you have? How many views do you have on TikTok? It's like really much more about those types of marketing. And I mean, the indie world has different metrics, but I think more than anything, it's like more than ever before. And I guess the one bit of how we did our career that I would say is emulatable. I mean, we made 2 records on our own, and the labels came to us and they wanted to send us back in the studio and make a big pop record, and we said nope, we already made 2 records, we want to tour for those and learn how to tour. And we went with Columbia and kind of traded creative control for other people were offering more money, and we said we just want creative control and we want patience. We're kids and we need to learn how to tour, and we want to build this and we want time to build it. And they agreed to do that. And I think that's the reason why we lasted as long as we did. So, I mean, yeah, for me these days, it's like, get your team together. Don't be afraid to do all the work yourself. If you're in a band, everybody needs to contribute something extra. Like if one guy's writing all the songs and singing them, another guy better be a good graphic artist as well as playing their instrument. Just because it takes all that from the beginning now. There's a ton of freedom and you can get it going on your own, but I think also people are figuring out every year ways to pay musicians less and less and to devalue creative work. So I don't envy anybody starting now. I feel really lucky that I can go out as a solo artist, and even if the band can't tour or whatever, I can get a guitar and I can go out there and I can busk if I need to. I know how to tour small. And so, being able to do that is important, but man, to have anything grow today, I don't envy anybody in there, because, it's so hard to actually make money on the road. And, Spotify and Apple Music, they don't really pay enough to make a living on, and nothing's come to replace that. So it's a really hard time to step in. So, I mean, do it because you love it. And hopefully you can make a living.
Yeah. And of course, at this point, you reference to being out on the road, and at this point, obviously, you're being out on the road is a little bit different than it would have been, a year plus ago. But at this point, as you mentioned, you're doing Facebook live streams, you're doing stage performances. When and where can people tune into those?
Mostly, I am on Facebook and YouTube. My page it's Glen Phillips Official, I think, on YouTube. And Facebook and YouTube, most weeks, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then stage it on Sunday nights. And I also lead kind of a community choir on Tuesday nights via Zoom. So I've been doing, like, this whole year, I've been doing 5 nights a week of shows of some kind or another. So really looking forward to not looking at a screen when I play music in the coming year. So yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Monday are 6 p.m. Pacific and noon Pacific on Wednesdays.
Glen Phillips, thank you very much for joining us. The latest single from Toad the Wet Sprocket is called Old Habits Die Hard. And for more about our guest, you can visit Glen Phillips, GlenPhillips.com. For SoundwordsSTL.com, I'm John Fleming. Catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Soundwords STL podcast.